So Bethesda fixed Fallout 4, or at least they fixed most of it. The update dropped, the DLC started showing up again for the majority of players. Saves started loading, Far Harbor and Nuka-World were accessible again. And for a lot of people, that was the end of the story. Problem solved. Move on. But I don't think we should just move on, and I want to explain why. So here's what actually happened. In November 2025, Bethesda pushed the Anniversary Edition update for Fallout 4. And that update, a mandatory update that console players had zero ability to opt out of, broke the DLC, not for everyone, but for a significant number of players, especially on PlayStation. Expansions they had paid for simply stopped being recognized. Far Harbor, Nuka-World, Automatron, Workshop packs, just gone from inside the game itself. Saves that depended on DLC regions wouldn't load, quests wouldn't trigger. Characters were literally stranded in expansion zones that the game had suddenly decided didn't exist anymore, and there was nothing players could do about it. They couldn't roll back the update. They couldn't opt out. They couldn't uninstall and go back to a version that worked. On PlayStation, the update was mandatory and there was no exit. PC players at least had options. They could disable updates, roll back builds, use community patches. PlayStation players had none of that. They were just stuck. And then they waited, and waited, and waited. We're talking roughly 3 months. 3 months where a portion of the Fallout 4 player base on PlayStation could not access content they had purchased. 3 months of silence from Bethesda that made everything worse. Because at least if a developer acknowledges the problem, you can be patient. You can tell yourself something is happening behind the scenes. But silence makes you assume the worst. Silence makes you feel abandoned. And that silence, more than almost anything else, was a big part of why the frustration in this community got so intense and stayed that way for so long. I covered this issue multiple times. I made videos when it first started. I made videos when it wasn't getting better. I made a video in early February 2026 when the situation still hadn't meaningfully changed and people were moving from frustration into resignation. And when Bethesda finally pushed the fix later in February, I covered that too, because it mattered. The fix was real, the early reports were encouraging. For the majority of affected players, things started working again. And that genuinely is a good thing. I'm not gonna pretend otherwise. But here's the question I keep coming back to. Is the fix enough? Is fixing the problem the same as making it okay that the problem happened in the first place? Because think about what players actually went through here. Someone buys Fallout 4. Maybe they buy the Season Pass, or the Game of the Year edition. Or they individually purchase Far Harbor, because they heard it was one of the best story expansions Bethesda has ever made. They invest time. Dozens of hours, hundreds of hours in some cases. They build characters, they make choices, they get deep into quest lines and settlement construction and faction decisions. This isn't passive consumption. Playing a Fallout game is an investment. You're building something. You're making decisions that feel like they matter. And then one day, because Bethesda pushed a mandatory update to a game from 2015, all of that becomes inaccessible. Not because of anything the player did, because of a back-end entitlement validation failure that the player had no control over and no ability to fix. That's a breach of the implicit agreement that exists between a publisher and a player when content is sold. It's not a small inconvenience. When you sell someone Far Harbor, you are telling them they can play Far Harbor, not temporarily, not conditionally, not unless a future mandatory update breaks the entitlement handshake and you happen to be one of the unlucky players caught in the crossfire. You are selling them access to that content. Period. And for 3 months, that access was gone. Now, I want to be fair here. Bethesda did eventually act. And the February patch wasn't a surface-level band-aid. The scope of it suggested they were actually working on the underlying entitlement validation architecture, addressing the root cause rather than just papering over symptoms. The fact that they simultaneously fixed a related PC issue with the Creations bundle and addressed Creation Club download crashes alongside the PlayStation DLC problem tells you something. These weren't isolated fixes. They were targeting the same broken system from multiple angles. That kind of work takes effort, and it's worth acknowledging. But it came 3 months late. 3 months where affected players had no real recourse. 3 months where the only options were to wait indefinitely, to escalate through support channels that largely couldn't help because the problem wasn't on the user side at all, or to give up entirely and walk away. And a lot of players chose that third option, out of exhaustion. I saw it happen in real time across my comment sections. The tone changed noticeably over those months. Early on, people were frustrated but still engaged. They were listing symptoms, asking questions, sharing workarounds, holding out hope. By late January and into early February, that had shifted. People weren't asking for help anymore. They were just saying goodbye and swearing off Bethesda. Uninstalled. Done. Never again. And that's the part a patch can't fully undo. Once someone has emotionally walked away from a game they loved, a fix doesn't automatically bring them back. Trust doesn't rebuild the way broken code does. You can push an update overnight. You cannot push an update that gives someone back the experience of those 3 months, or restore the enthusiasm they had before any of this happened. There's also a broader conversation here that I think this situation forced into the open in a way a lot of people hadn't really confronted before. This wasn't just a Fallout 4 problem. It was a preview of something bigger. Mandatory updates on lockdown platforms. Paid content tied to entitlement verification systems that can silently fail years after purchase. Digital ownership that is technically on record but functionally unreliable under certain conditions. The situation Fallout 4 players found themselves in isn't unique to this game. It's baked into how modern digital distribution works. You don't own the content, you own a license to access the content under conditions that the publisher and platform control. And when those conditions break down, the player has almost no leverage. Now, to be clear, Fallout 4 didn't invent this system, but it exposed it in a really visible, really undeniable way, because this wasn't a niche edge case. This wasn't something that quietly affected a handful of players on an obscure platform configuration. This was widespread, documented, persistent. Millions of people owned this game, and a meaningful chunk of the PlayStation player base spent 3 months locked out of content they had paid real money for. And Bethesda's response, ultimately a fix that arrived roughly 3 months after the problem started, with very little meaningful communication in between, is not a model for how this should be handled. So what should have happened? Faster acknowledgement, clear, consistent communication about what was being investigated and what the timeline looked like, interim guidance that was actually useful, and critically, a much faster resolution. 3 months is not an acceptable timeline for a publisher to fix a bug that renders paid content completely inaccessible on a major platform. So yes, the fix is good. Yes, it's better than no fix. Yes, I'm glad most players can access their DLC again. And yes, I'm glad that for a lot of people, this story has a functional ending. All of that is true, and all of that matters. But it's also worth saying clearly and directly that what happened here was not okay. Paying for content and then losing access to it for 3 months because of a mandatory update you had no ability to opt out of is not okay. The prolonged silence that accompanied those 3 months is not okay. And the fact that a fix eventually arrived does not retroactively make the experience acceptable for every player who lived through it. For the people who lost saves they had spent hundreds of hours building. For the people who had characters permanently stranded in DLC zones the game stopped recognizing. For the people who just got tired of waiting and walked away from a game they genuinely loved. A fix after the fact doesn't erase that. Bethesda made a significant mistake here. The Anniversary Edition update should not have shipped in a state that broke DLC entitlements on PlayStation, and even if that kind of failure is difficult to fully prevent, the 3-month timeline to address it, combined with the silence along the way, made a bad situation substantially worse than it needed to be. The gaming community, especially the Fallout community, deserves more than a quiet patch and a return to business as usual. A fix is the minimum expected outcome when paid content breaks. It's not a favor, it's not generosity, it's the bare minimum obligation that comes with selling someone a product. I'll keep monitoring the situation, because there are still some players in edge cases who haven't seen a full resolution. Not everyone is back to normal yet, and if something changes or a new issue surfaces, I'll cover it. But for now, I think it was worth stepping back and saying what a lot of people are thinking but maybe haven't heard said out loud. Bethesda fixed Fallout 4. Eventually, it took 3 months longer than it should have, and ideally, the problem should never have happened in the first place.